Welcome to today's edition of the People's Playbook Podcast. I'm pretty stoked today. I have Adrian Capobianco on the show today, who is the co-founder and CEO of, I love this name because I love it, a fast-growing platform helping brands and creators actually win in the new era of social commerce. With a background, Adrian's background is absolutely massive, but with a background spanning in entrepreneurship, innovation, and brand growth, Adrian helps reshape how influence actually drives modern business. Really cool subject and some great leadership and culture, nuggets we're going to get out of this conversation. So Adrian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on. Adrian, your background's extensive and you are a true, in my humble opinion, you are an absolutely true entrepreneur. When you look at your past and what you've created and what you've been part of and whatnot, you are, I don't even know if I could say, you'd be a good employee. Maybe you just have to be your own company and your own employee, correct?
Well, actually, I'd reframe that a little bit, to be honest. I think, one of my bosses a while back suggested this and said, intrapreneur. A bit of a mix of entrepreneur, but entrepreneurial, either solo within organizations or within organizations. So
Yeah.
I think, to build on what you're saying about, the entrepreneur side of things is I've always loved to build, right? I always love the opportunity of kind of creating a vision of how something can be different and hopefully better, usually better. And whether that's building something net new within an existing organization or, from an idea to an actual business, that always gets me fired up. One of my favorite toys as a kid was Lego and it was kind of building, right? And I still love to do like landscaping and build stuff and construction projects and do that with businesses as well. So I think what you're picking up there in terms of the entrepreneurial side, whether within organizations or as net new, is really that love of kind of coming up with an idea, a vision of how something can be different, how something can be better, and then putting a plan into place to actually build that.
Yeah. Well, let's keep on that theme right now. Speaking about building. So you're basically in charge of building the intersection of brands, creators, and commerce along the way. What leadership skill matters most in fast-moving industries like this?
I'd say a few things, and whether fast moving or not, absolutely still relevant. It goes back to that vision that I was just talking about, so that vision, that idea, even when we're, presenting to a client about the opportunity of how we can, move their brand or their business, leveraging creators, we're always trying to lock in on what's that vision we're looking to do, right?
Yeah.
So that vision of what you want to do and why it matters is critical. But a vision without a plan, to put that into action is, just an idea, right? Everyone has ideas. So, take that vision, put a plan together, and then, things are going to happen along the way from plan through to execution. There's a famous, I don't know if you know, there's a famous Mike Tyson line about plans. Do you know the quote?
Yeah, I love it. It's one of my favorite quotes. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So at that point, you need, get up ability, which is get back up after being knocked down. And maybe we'll chat a bit about that after. But it's that adaptability, really, right? It's like you have a plan in place, but I can almost guarantee you no plan goes exactly as envisioned. So adaptability to maneuver and evolve is necessary. And then the resilience, because, you have a vision, you have a plan. If you're starting something, if you're building something, you will get knocked down. You will, fail along the way, small failures along the way. In my estimation, the people who are the most successful, it's not that they haven't been knocked down. They just get back up one more time than everybody else. So vision, plan, adaptability, resilience, these are all things that I'd say are pretty important.
Yeah. When you say, when you're dealing with that leader that just needs to get back up and try something different or try a new approach to it, how hard is it to get them to kind of see that when they're just, sometimes they feel defeated along the way and they're just like, Adrian, I don't know if I can do this again, or I don't know if this is going to work. How do you kind of get them back on track?
Bring it back to the vision, right? What's the vision? What's the goal? And also, part of understanding that it's a normal process, right?
Yeah.
If you're out, trying to build new clients or build something different, you may get 6, 7, 8, 60, 70 no's before you get a yes, right? And in my experience too, like a no or, a failure or a loss doesn't mean that will be that forever. We have a very good client now that was, a client a decade ago, and different leadership, different, global environment. That was a very, very, very difficult client. Didn't
Yeah.
close the door on the people who were good people there and their clients today. So,
Yeah.
a no or a loss along the way doesn't mean that's indefinite either, right? So bring it back to the vision, take yourself up, know that it's part of the normal process.
And I love this conversation because there's so many times you want to shake somebody and say, in a positive way, you just want to say, hey, it never goes as planned. And that's okay. Like when you see these fine executed plans that companies and people and entrepreneurs and business leaders do, it wasn't like, hey, you know what? We just took one take on that and it worked out perfectly. Right. And if it is, it's very few and far between those wins along the way. There's always been some tweaks, some adjustments, some ways we have to adapt just to get our vision to make it a fruition, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in the rearview mirror, everything's 2020, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're looking back to how things have gone, it can be very obvious. When you're looking forward, it isn't. So back to that adaptability. So I 100% agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Adrian, you've launched multiple ventures. How do you know when you need to double down on something versus walk away from the idea? Because you're a very persistent person. I know that we've done our kind of analytics and whatnot, and that's probably why you're so successful is because you're very persistent in the way you do things. I could tell you couldn't do it, and I know you'd say, "Don't think I can do that, Jay? No problem." And you'd probably text me later on with a picture of yourself doing it, right? So, how do you know? Hey, I'm going to double down on this right now, or I'm going to walk away. It's time to walk away.
That's a tough one. Again, like in hindsight, that answer's 2020. It's perfectly easy to see. In the
Yeah.
moment, it's very difficult to see. I think it's also a bit of a personal situation, right? Like I've tried to put myself in situations with mixed success where there's not a runway that I'm gonna, hit the end of. There's always kind of, like you got to create a situation where you don't have to walk unless you want to. Because, sometimes it might just be a timing thing, right? And it goes back to that kind of resilience I can have, especially if you're trying to do something different, you're trying to do something new. That is not the path of least resistance. So try to put yourself in a situation where you don't hit the end of the runway. That's not always possible. And that's sometimes difficult, but kind of give you that. But I think it also goes back to that kind of resilience, that kind of get back up. Eventually you're going to hit a wall, right? And what I trust is not what people say, what people do, right? So people are like, oh, that's a great idea. I love it. And then, okay, great. Spend some money with us. Let's do it. Right. So,
Yeah.
ultimately you're going to hit a wall if it's not generating revenue, if you're not getting that traction with clients, like, the get back up is a good thing, but you got to see that traction. You've got to see that momentum. Momentum for me is big, right? In building the business. So it's like, if you're not building that momentum, and momentum doesn't always have to be dollars. I mean, certainly that's a very good thing if it is actual dollars revenue coming in. It doesn't have to be profit, but certainly that's a good thing. But momentum in terms of partnerships, in terms of, employees, team, that sort of stuff, like people buying into that vision. If you're not building that momentum, that might be the time to fold. But again, this is a very personal question because everyone's situation is different, right?
Yeah. Has there been ever a time, Adrian, where somebody said, Adrian, this is ridiculous. Stop, quit, stop, like walk away from this. And you've actually said, no, I'm still going to trudge forward.
I'm sure there have been lots of situations, small and large, but I mean, actually in terms of like a business, like a vision of the business, not that I can think of along the way, I'm sure. Right.
Yeah.
And it's, often it's like, it's never that black and white quite often, unless you're really going down kind of a silly path, unless you really have, voices of friends who are kind of, or not maybe necessarily, but friends, but like trusted voices who will share a no BS answer with you, right? Often, it's a little more platitudes and stuff like that. Maybe in hindsight, be like, oh, I thought that was a bad idea. I can't believe you're doing that. You're like, yeah, thanks, Tips. You should have told me, 12 months ago or something. But no, I think I would say, absolutely yes, in the sense of, always, looking to build a business through new clients, right? And build new clients and pitch new clients. And there's a lot of no's along the way there to build to those yeses. So in that sense, all the time.
Great answer. Because I love it runs on partnership and performance. How do you build accountability without losing creativity?
Kind of think that's a weird question. Why are they mutually exclusive?
Let's talk about that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so a lot of times when people are talking about accountability, we lose creativity along the way because they're just looking to just get the numbers, get the numbers, get the numbers, right? And we sacrifice creativity. How do you actually make sure they both can live within the same world?
I don't think they need to be mutually exclusive. Now, if you're talking about, depending on the type of business and that sort of thing, right? But the word you used was accountability, right? You didn't use like profitability or revenue, you used accountability.
Yep.
So, I'll give you an example of where it's absolutely not mutually exclusive. So in our business of BILI is to connect brands with social media influencers, right? There's about 10 million influencers in North America. We have data on every single one. For some brands, and we're going to touch on this a little bit, for some brands and businesses, working with influencers, even though the first influencer program I did was over 20 years ago, for some brands, it feels very new and very risky. So, you can say we have a creative approach to this in that we're one of our few peers. We will guarantee the performance for a client. The reason we do that is one, clients look to us to be the experts, and we are. So, we say, we don't just say we're the experts at it, but we put our money where our mouth is in a certain sense and guarantee the performance of a program. And we're very specific with what that means. But I'll say that, in a way, it's a creative way of approaching the partnership. It's creative in that none of our peers really do that, but it's very performance related, right?
Yes.
So, it helps de-risk the input. So as clients are reviewing proposals and inputs and that sort of stuff, it takes the risk off the input because they know at the end of the day, they're going to have a guaranteed output and that outcome.
Yes.
So it's a creative way that's very performance oriented. That's absolutely hand in hand. So I've always been a fan of, I've spent a lot of time in the advertising business. And when you talk about creativity, it's like, the creative, right? It's the ads, the content, the material that goes towards that audience, right? But to me, creativity and how you run a business and how you fuel a business and accountability are amazing when they're absolutely hand in hand. And they don't need to be at all mutually exclusive.
I love it. I love that. And I love how you brought some clarity to that. Let's keep down that road of metrics right now. So in a world full of metrics, what numbers can actually mislead leaders the most?
I would actually, to build on what we were just talking about performance and how we kind of de-risk the inputs and guarantee an output.
Yeah.
I would say the exact same thing. It's, the perception that action is output for a leader, right? So I'll give you an example. Answering every email in my inbox and going through everything in the inbox and getting through everything, that's not an output, that's activity, right? So, okay, I cleaned my inbox, I got done with everything in my inbox. That's not an outcome, right? So, thinking that being busy or activity is the outcome is not the same thing. And understanding, I find this, I'm guilty of this as well, but, kind of link, what activity generates the best outcome is important. So, being busy doing things does not equal an outcome. And that's probably kind of a metric to be, to be wise of and be careful of.
I talk to leaders about that all the time. You just touch on that. People think sometimes when I'm busy, I'm just swamped, I'm busy and whatnot. When you actually break down their day and you think, okay, you've been busy, but what did you actually accomplish today? It's amazing the difference between that question and actually just thinking I'm getting stuff done, right? It is, we can get trapped by reacting as opposed to being proactive. And the other thing I feel leaders get caught in is managing versus leading, because when they manage, they're kind of in the business sometimes too much and they're doing everything. When they actually trust and they communicate and they actually lead, they can actually get so much more done, and the results are rewarded because of that.
I can tell a story on something I call the possum principle. It'll probably take a minute and a half, and it may be a bit of a divergence, but also this is, but before that, and I'm going to get back to this habit, just speaking of this, reminding of it, right? It's easy to get busy throughout a day. You got calls, you got meetings, people, this kind of stuff. I developed a bit of a habit. I learned it from someone along the way, but in the morning, the 2 or 3 things that need to get done that will make a difference at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. Literally write them down and have them in front of you. At the end of the day, I need to get these 2 things done. They will create an impact on my team or my business or outcomes. And it's kind of keeping yourself accountable to it, because 100 things are going to come up during the day, but those 2 or 3 things that need to be done, if they're not done, I missed the mark that day. A lot of problems solve themselves too. And this may be a little counterintuitive. I don't know if you know about possums. So I kind of call it the possum principle jokingly, but they're kind of crazy animals. Possums have survived since prehistoric times. So, they have survived the test of time. Do you know possum's defense mechanism?
Playing dead?
Not actually playing dead. When they're attacked, there's no fight to the death. There's no run your ass off. They fall into a coma. So when they're attacked, they actually take a nap. Literally, they fall into a coma. I learned this when I had a giant possum in my garage, and I was like, "Oh, me, animal bigger," and try to scare it with a hockey stick, and it just laid there. It's still, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, why is this thing not afraid of me? I'm bigger, I'm louder, I got a hockey stick," and it just sat there. And I'm like, "Okay, maybe something's weird with this thing." So I just kind of backed away and left it alone. I came back and it was gone. when they're attacked, they fall into a coma. So I kind of joke about the possum principle. There's 100, goofy guys with a hockey stick coming at you in a day.
Yeah.
You don't need to react to every single one, right? Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I hear you. Come back tomorrow morning, give me 24 hours, and we'll address it then. And
Yeah.
8 out of 10 of those are going to solve themselves, and the two that haven't, need your attention. So it's kind of that, that activity versus outcome. I know I diverged there a little bit. Sorry about that, but
No, I actually love it, and I actually love the road you're going down because I believe that sometimes leaders and founders and owners and C-suite, they react too quickly. And when you actually just take time to actually step back for a second, and let the possum get out of the garage,
yeah,
nothing really happens, right? And how many times I know I'm guilty of this. I've actually seen an email and here I am, keyboard wizard, getting ready to type away and just ready to send that. And then sometimes somebody will say to me, "Hey, don't send that email right now." And I read it even 2 hours later, Adrian, and I think to myself, oh, thank the Lord I didn't send that email because I was speaking with emotion. I was reacting. I was, either elated or pissed off at something that I saw on the screen. And I said, I'm going to react right now. So it is a blind spot for me as a leader for sure that sometimes I just have to say, you know what? Do the Adrian thing. And I'm just going to go in the house and hope this possum leaves the garage right now. Right.
yeah, yeah, and then yeah.
Unbelievable. What separates teams that move fast from teams that just stay busy? Because we're on that subject right now. So,
I think I would take that back to vision, right? It's kind of when you said kind of like how do you light up? Like it's that vision, right? It's not kind of the active. Like what are we here to do, right? What are we
yeah,
here to achieve? What's the prize at the end of this? Eyes on the prize. It's the vision. I think so.
do you ever have to take leaders back to that with your clients? Do you ever, because you deal with many leaders, and they're probably all very different along the way based on, what industry they're in or what they're dealing with. Do you constantly have that kind of vision, kind of mantra in the back of your head that says, hey, like, let's just dial back into what we're doing this for in the first place?
Usually, not always. Like a lot of things, and I'm certainly imperfect on that. But even the vision doesn't have to be the massive vision for the business. It can also just be for a project, right?
Yeah.
And I try to kind of coach my team, when we're developing proposals for clients when things are going forward. Like, what's our vision here, right? What's our desired outcome? And then come back to that, right? So if we pitch a client an opportunity of where to take their business with influencers, or how we'll help them connect with audiences in new, meaningful ways, in ways they haven't done before, and what we want to achieve from that, there'll be a vision at the beginning of that we get people excited about. I always kind of coach my team to go back to that, right? What was
Yeah.
our vision and did we hit it or did we miss it, right? If we hit it, great. If it changed along the way, why? And does everyone align with that? And if we missed, why? And what are we going to do to get us there? So, yeah.
Yeah. Adrian, this is totally just from conversation. So I just want your view on this. So I was just thinking in the back of my head, you must deal with so many leaders and people along the way. And I'm a big believer in leadership without titles, right? You don't have to be a CEO or a president to be a leader, right? But when you're dealing with the companies that you deal with, you probably experience both, not an age, I don't want to use that, but a more experienced leader that's led many companies or led many things. And you probably deal with also very young leaders that are founders or just starting things up along the way. What's the main difference between them both being just so different in age and kind of experience?
The difference between a more tenured leader and a younger leader, there's going to be generalizations, and certainly they're not all, don't always, younger leaders, I would, quite often not ambitious, that's not the right word, but perhaps, a bit more optimistic about
Okay.
what they do. Sometimes with, more tenured leaders, it's, been there, done that, not going to work. And sometimes that, that's learning, right?
Yeah.
And that's, that sends you down a path. But it's, I guess the nuance is kind of the, versus the optimism and kind of the learnings along the way, a bit of both in there, right? Create,
Yeah.
keep the optimism for what can be done without sometimes being hinged to the learnings of what can't be done. Both are important. And, if there's a bit of a merge, a merge between those, it can be great.
Yeah.
So like I said, generalization certainly, but there's benefits on both sides of that coin. And if you can tap kind of the, optimism for what can be done with the learnings of, how to make sure that's most likely to see the light of day, that can be great.
I love that. I actually think it's a great reminder. So I would actually ask you personally, you've led, many things and many companies and started things and co-founded and whatnot. How do you keep yourself balanced between that? Because there's probably some things I could bring up with you and you'd say, Jay, I did that, done that's not going to work and whatnot. How do you actually balance yourself and kind of say, okay, I need to make sure that I keep that optimism and that juice in me that just makes me kind of keep going?
How about I pivot on that a little bit, not kind of just with myself, but with team.
Okay.
With team and stuff like that. So, you know, and I've had this for a while, I'll often have kind of a conviction on where I want to take something or go with something and have a kind of a perspective on why I think it'll work. I've had folks coach me along the way, maybe kind of step above that and either, the team that's working on them, bring them along in the journey that you've already locked in your mind of where you want to go. So they kind of, they're not just the destination, but they understand kind of the journey of getting there to that vision. So sharing that a little bit, but also, letting team members help develop that journey themselves, right? Instead of just saying, go to point C, say, how would you get to point C? What do you think? Right. So, I might already have idea on how to get there, but if my job is limited to telling people how to get there, I'm not scaling myself. Right. I'm just giving direction. So trying to, and I've tried to get better at this over the years, but trying to ask team members how they would get to an outcome versus letting them know how I think the reason to get to an outcome is. And then sometimes they end up getting to better outcomes than I would have thought of. So yeah, it's kind of trying to like flip that a little bit and give team members who have, an ownership mentality, the opportunity to build a vision and the route to getting to that vision themselves.
Absolutely love that answer. Let's go down that young path for a second. If I were to say to you, hey, Adrian, there's some young leaders out there that want your advice, and you could say, hey, I'm going to take this young leader and I'm going to give him three pieces of advice. What advice would that be if you said, hey, somebody came to you and said, Adrian, help me out here. I'm starting a company or I'm kind of starting my journey. And you could say, hey, here's the 3 things I want you to remember along the way. What would you say to that person?
I'd go right back to the first 4 we talked about right at the opening, right? I really feel like we're, beating this one over the head, but what's the vision? Like, what do you want to accomplish? What's the plan to get there? Like build that plan. Like you said, right? Be ready. That plan will not go as planned. So have some adaptability in that and resilience to get back up. I'd also say, kind of take the moment to enjoy the wins along the way.
I love that.
It's like, a lot of you win a big piece of business. It's kind of like good news, bad news. Good news. We won that giant piece of business. Bad news. Got to deliver that giant piece of business. And that's what you got to do, right? You got to go from like, that idea, that vision into the plan and execution, but, try to take a moment, savor it, enjoy it. And,
Do you remember one of your mentors and some of the advice that they gave you along the way?
Yeah, I think that one that we just talked about, one of my early bosses had become a partner investor along the way. It was kind of like, you kind of lock in on an end goal and then march towards it. And often that end goal seems, reasonable and you get there, but don't march that alone and, bring your team along on that kind of mental journey of, why and how that end goal so that, they're not, you're not dragging them along. They're pushing you forward. That's probably a good way to say it. I think that was a good learning.
Adrian, you've been more than generous with your time today. You're a pretty spectacular guy. And what I mean by that is just your different kind of concepts on leadership and founding and scaling and moving with speed and trust and communication. So I want to thank you for your time today. Appreciate you and appreciate kind of what you're bringing to life. I'm sure that, in 20 years, Because I Love It's going to be massive, but more importantly, there's probably going to be 20 other companies beside that are beside Because I Love It, just based on kind of your leadership style and how you like to, as we talked about earlier in this conversation, build and create and whatnot. I don't think that's ever going to leave you. I think that's what you're meant to do, is build and create. And I appreciate your time today.
That's amazing. Thanks, Jason. Take care. Hopefully your audience got 1 or 2 nuggets.
For sure. They always do. If you love that session and that conversation as much as I did, would love to have you join our People Playbook community in the link below.